Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz musician and artistic director of the Blue Llama Jazz Club, David Sharp. He is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We had a very open talk about the reopening of the Blue Llama, his history in music, why he loves what he does, hope for the future, and so much more. Get to know him and enjoy.
Okay, David, hey, thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz.
You are very welcome.
So we're in the middle of probably one of the most rich vortexes of chaos in the history of this country. It's really ripped through, obviously, all of the arts, and jazz has been a part of that. How have you been doing since March of 2020, keeping things going and keeping that jazz flame alive?
It's been up and down, to tell you the truth. You know, we were shut down for about 3 months, and then again for about another 3 months or so at the beginning of 2021. We've had moderate degrees of success depending on, you know, the condition of COVID-19, you know. With the spikes and with the decreases in cases, we've seen the following of our club follow the ups and downs pretty closely.
So have you been able to keep afloat okay? I mean, now that, you know, kind of the world is waking up and things are starting to take off, are you in a relatively decent space where you can keep this ship going and everything's going to be good?
It seems that way right now. You know, what we're taking a phased approach at the moment where we are, like for the month of April, for example, we opened for only Fridays and Saturdays. And that worked really well to the point where in the middle of May, we expanded to Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It seems as if people are a little more willing to come out since they've been vaccinated. And, you know, to answer your original question, yeah, I think we're going to make it mainly because there's a lot of interest and a lot of people coming out to hear live music because people have really been missing the live music experience.
What was that last live show you had prior to everything shutting down back in March of 2020? Do you remember that show?
Oh, yeah, I do. It was Ellen Rose. It was Ellen Rowe, who's a fantastic piano player, and she's a professor at the University of Michigan for the jazz department. Ellen Rowe led an all-female octet called Momentum. It was amazing. Like, it was just an amazing show. Everybody was sort of looking at each other like, well, should we be here? Should we not be here? Like, what's happening? Like, people, you know, different areas of the country are shutting down and different areas are staying open. But yeah, well, like once that show ended, that was it. You know, we weren't open until we reopened in June of 2020.
Talk to me a little bit about Ann Arbor, the home of the Blue Llama. What's the scene like there? How do these musicians keep things going and alive?
Well, the Ann Arbor scene is pretty diverse in terms of the approaches to jazz. I don't know, there's a big folk scene in Ann Arbor, which kind of revolves around the Ark, which is a nonprofit performance venue that's right upstairs from the Blue Llama. The jazz scene kind of resides in a few different venues, including ours. And what we get is we get players from Detroit coming in where, you know, they're kind of in like the straight ahead genre where, you know, it's kind of straight ahead, it's swinging, you know, thinking like late 50s, early 60s, Coltrane and Miles, like that style. We're lucky to have a university with a lot of younger jazz musicians who are studying and creating their own approach to jazz. I would say that's a little bit more modern, and like for instance, last night we had a quartet of some younger guys, and they were in the green room watching live videos of Chick Corea in the last few years of his life, and you know, sort of going that Chick Corea trio sound, you know. So I don't know. The scene is, you know, the scene is suffering this because mainly we're the only venue doing live jazz at the moment. After a year and 3 months, we're the only venue doing live jazz at the moment.
So I guess that's my next question to you is, it's almost as though a lot of what the arts have to do is almost kind of a phoenix moment. Things have been kind of burnt down, and there's going to have to be some level of rebirth. How do you see the world of jazz musicians coming back stronger? What do you see as things that are going to make this community of jazz artists that much stronger as we all return to the live element?
One thing I think certainly happened, and I can include myself in this because I'm a musician, I'm a bass player, and I compose and I lead a quartet and I perform, and I have been doing that for decades. But one thing I've seen in myself and in other musicians is a lot of great music has been written during this time, where almost everybody had a vacation from the hustle of gigging and had no choice but to retreat into more of a composing, exploratory mode of, okay, I'm just going to start writing. I'm going to start writing some new music. Not to say people weren't composing before, but I think this just pushed it in that direction by necessity. I'm actually interested to hear a lot of the new stuff that people have come up with during this time, because I found myself really coming up with a lot of different things that I probably wouldn't have come up with otherwise.
What are you noticing with people that are coming in and listening to live music now, or even the musicians? Is there a level of an appreciation? Is there a different way that they're kind of interacting with the live jazz environment versus prior to the pandemic?
I think people are reacting like, they've seen their long-lost uncle or their long-lost brother. It's like, oh, I haven't seen live music for such a long time. This feels so good. I can't believe how good this sounds. And the people are super excited and energized, and I think a little bit more appreciative. I think before the pandemic, I think live music was taken for granted to a certain degree. Not by everybody, but by some people. But after it being sort of wiped out for a full year plus, it seems like people's attitudes have changed. As far as musicians go, everybody's really kind of, I don't know, all the musicians I've talked to, and I talk to a lot of them because, right now we have live music 3 days a week at the club. So I see anywhere from 9 to 12 to 16 musicians per week as I'm running the club, and they're like, oh man, we're so excited to be back. Oh, I gotta dust off the cobwebs a little bit, kind of get back into it a little bit, and you can sort of hear people kind of getting back into it where they're not in that hustle groove that they were in the past. But once they get into it, it seems like they're taking it to a higher level.
Talk to me a little bit about your history in music, a little bit about your childhood and how jazz kind of became something that was heavy on your radar.
My dad listened to a lot of jazz. He really liked the Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and he also liked Cal Tjader. With stuff leaning toward the Latin mambo style back in the 60s. So I listened to that growing up, as well as a pretty wide variety of rock, a wide variety of classical music, and then once I went to college, I went to the University of Michigan. I started collecting my own jazz records. And one of the very first records I bought at a record store was Thelonious in Action, live at the Five Spot, which is Thelonious Monk and Johnny Griffin at the Five Spot in New York. And to this day, that remains one of my top records I'll never get tired of listening to it. And I keep hearing different things when I go back and listen to it, depending on what I'm working on or what I'm thinking about. From that Monk record, I branched off into a lot of records from that era, like the late 50s New York, whether it's Coltrane, Miles, or Johnny Griffin, or Hank Mobley. I'm trying to think of the trumpet player, Lee Morgan. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
You also play music. Talk to me a little bit about how all of that began for you. How did you pick up the bass, and how did that become a part of what part of your world that you do now?
During my first year of college, I met a friend who was a singer in a band. He was in a local band, and he could also play bass. I was interested in learning, so he wrote down a few notes for me on a piece of paper. I took that piece of paper, and then I went out and I bought a bass, and I taught myself what he wrote me down on that piece of paper. I just went on what he showed me. And then taught myself bass for a few years, and then once I got to the University of Michigan, I started doing all kind of improvisational music, whether it was electric music or acoustic music. And then really from there, I just started forming groups, like-minded individuals, where we started composing our own music. We started learning the jazz standards, which also sort of led me to, studying different forms of music from around the world. And, one thing that, like, two forms of music that I still listen to all the time and still keep discovering new music is, the music from India and music from different countries in Africa, whether it's West Africa or East Africa, Northern Africa, which kind of has a little bit more of an Arabic flavor depending on where you are. My musical journey continues. Yesterday I just heard a great record from Sudan that was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was really, really amazing.
What about recordings? What kind of recordings have you put out?
I put out 2 records with my group, which is called Dave Sharp's Secret 7. I have one record that's entitled 7, and the other one that's called Worlds. And those 2 records were, they were jazz records at the center of the whole idea, but then we brought in different guest musicians from different parts of the world, from India, from Africa, from California, from New York, from Nashville. All original compositions, all collaborative. I worked with my friend Chris Kircher, who is a saxophonist, a tenor saxophonist out of Detroit. He and I composed all the music, and then I did all the arranging and all of the sort of layering and collaboration pieces where we would bring in different guest artists to, put down a percussion track or put down a violin track or put down a vocal track. So yeah, that's under the name Dave Sharp Secret 7. My latest project is Dave Sharp Worlds Quartet, and that's available on Spotify and Amazon and Apple Music and all those places, which is a little bit of a stripped-down quartet with strings and percussion. It's bass, oud, violin, and world percussion.
So how do these worlds come together for you? Running a club and being a musician, how does each one help the other as you kind of maintain your life as both an artist and a businessman?
That's a great question. Well, I do get to meet people that I normally would not meet, people who are coming through the club. Like I got to meet Robbie Coltrane, for instance. And I've been a fan of his music and his father's music for ages. Similarly, I got to meet, Ellis Marsalis from New Orleans, who recently passed away. I was able to not only hear him play for 2 nights, but we were able to sit down and he was telling me stories about the scene in New Orleans, the jazz scene in New Orleans. Similar with Kurt Elling. I got to meet Kurt Elling, spend some time with him, heard him perform like 4 shows, and, just really learned a lot from, just from a musician's point of view, like, being a musician and a band leader and really kind of being in the moment, experiencing that music and the audience. Out of the shows we had in the first year, like the Kurt Elling quintet shows that we did, were really pretty astounding as far as seeing a group so in tune with the music and with the audience at the same time.
Talk to me a little bit about the first live show that you ever saw. Obviously, you have a club, and live music's a big part of your world. What was the first live show that you ever saw that really blew you away, and you just thought, man, that's the way it should be?
Oh, wow. Let's see. Boy, that was a long time ago.
Got to flip through the Rolodex.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to say it was Peter Gabriel. The reason for that is, again, sort of like the connection with the audience, the theatrical nature of it, the real percussion and bass heavy grooves of his music at the time. Also, his world music influences. People sort of get down on Peter Gabriel for inventing the term world music, or being part of the industry's effort to label world music as a genre. However, I think he did a lot to really expose a lot of people to music they would have never heard otherwise. I was just cleaning up at my house, and I found an old cassette that I had made off the radio of KUSF, because I lived in San Francisco for a while in the 90s. And I used to listen to the radio show. It was called The Music of India. And it was every Sunday. And the guys would come in and bring their record collections and play all this amazing music from India that you couldn't find. You couldn't find it online. You couldn't find it. There was no Spotify. There was no YouTube back then. And I used to just capture this music on the cassette tape. And that was really the only way you could hear this stuff, And, nowadays, with, you have a phone in your hand where you can look up music from anywhere, which can be kind of overwhelming in a way. Like, it's almost like there's too much to listen to. But yeah, I've had a lot of different exposures to different styles of music. When I lived in the Bay Area of San Francisco, I was able to study with Salamat Ali Khan, who is the uncle of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. This is a Pakistani singer. He had two sons who played music around the Bay Area. And I studied music with him for a while. I was super fortunate just to be able to meet him and spend some time with him, learn different musical forms from the Hindustani tradition, and hear music that I otherwise would not have heard.
It's interesting because the more and more I talk to musicians and probe into like the first shows, it always comes back to a radio show. There's always kind of the lights always kind of got flicked on, and I think that that's a great thing. That's been such a service to people over the years. What about mentors? Who would you credit as people that not only influenced you as a musician, but as somebody that is running a club and had a desire to do so?
I don't know. I teach music as well. I taught music privately for about 15 years, and I taught jazz band classes to both youth and adults, where I would group together musicians who were studying music, and we would play together as a group. At the time, I was working with a friend. His name is Alex Johnson, and he was doing the same thing with rock and blues. I group people together in a jazz setting, and what we would do is we would go out and perform. Once my students were ready, they would go out and do a live performance in front of an audience. And eventually, I did that with one group. I did it with two groups. I did it with three, 4, and 5 groups. Eventually, I was doing these whole concerts with multiple groups, which kind of gave way to me like creating a festival in Ann Arbor. It's the A2 Jazz Fest. I thought, well, if I do this with my students, why don't I do this with professional groups? I can get together 8 or 9 different ensembles. We'll play on one day, and we'll have a whole showcase of, local groups who are all doing slightly different styles. And that grew and grew over the years. We did 4 consecutive years of the A2 Jazz Fest. And then while I was in the middle of making that festival happen, I was approached to be the artistic director for Blue Llama Jazz Club. They asked me to basically do the same thing I was doing, except at a club, booking groups 5 nights a week. So it's kind of an evolution.
Why do you love jazz?
I like the expressiveness, and I like the variety. I really like to hear people really putting soul and feeling into the music they do. And I also like the variety of approaches that people have. Like, there's different expressions of the soul, and there's also different expressions of melodic and rhythmic concepts. Like, not everybody is playing the same rhythm, or not everybody's playing the same melody, or not everybody's playing with the same mood. There's a lot of different moods in jazz.
So everything's going to come down to this. Everyone has an idea or perception of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, your workers, but you're the one ultimately living your life. Who do you think you are?
Man, these are some great questions.
Thank you.
I think that I am a musician who is really, I think I'm a musician who is able to navigate a lot of different circles of my fellow musicians. I'm able to communicate with the older generation, the younger generation, with my generation. I'm also able to appreciate the musical choices people make depending on what their artistic vision is. Like, I can really say, okay, this is great. This has merit. This is a totally new approach. This is taking an old approach but putting a new spin on it. One thing that I've done in the last 10 years is I've played in a gypsy jazz group. I've played in a klezmer band, playing more of like a Jewish folk music, really old style folk music, like more of an Eastern European vibe. So, I guess I would say I'm really open to exploring different forms of music and appreciating different forms of music. So, I think that's my trip, is I'm pretty open to possibilities. I could point to the reason why I'm open. I think it has to do with, I studied philosophy as an undergraduate student. Philosophy is the study of different possibilities and different permutations. I also interacted with a lot of different people through my school years. Whether those people were teachers, whether they were athletes, whether they were musicians, theater people, whether they were drinking beer and smoking weed, whether they were building fast cars. I grew up near Detroit, and, machinery was a pretty heavy thing in that area. So, I think my openness to different approaches, whether it's how you live your life or whether how you play music or what era of music you appreciate, it's part of what I am, just open to all those things.
Beautiful, man. David, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I appreciate it. Good luck with everything as we move forward with live music and beyond.
You bet, Joe. Great talking to you, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Ann Arbor, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to David for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.